This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. When new ideas come forward, we can have a hard time accepting them for the value they represent. In the case of Bitcoin, the virtual currency that's now worth billions of dollars, value is precisely the question. New York Times business reporter Nathaniel digs under the surface to find out more in Digital Gold, Bitcoin, and the inside story of the misfits and millionaires trying to reinvent money. And then, in a world increasingly driven by popular discussion, the possibility of popular outrage at scientific discovery has the ability to shut down discussions and ruin careers. Northwestern University professor Alice Dreger shares her findings in Galileo's Middle Finger, Heretics, Activists, and the Search for Justice in Science. But first, here's my in-the-flesh interview with Nathaniel about the most famous virtual currency. So we hear a lot about Bitcoin in bits and pieces from the news. As this virtual currency that you can maybe use, maybe store value in. How did you first hear of Bitcoin?
I first heard about it essentially from the Winklevoss twins, the two brothers who are best known for their battles with Mark Zuckerberg over Facebook. Their story was told in The Social Network, the movie. They actually sort of came to us at the Times, and they wanted to talk about the fact that they had amassed what was a pretty significant stash of Bitcoins, something like $10 million worth of them back in 2013. And this was right when sort of public awareness of this thing was first starting to bubble up. People were becoming aware of it.
And how is it possible that it's worth anything, right? I've got a lot of files on my computer that no one would pay anything for. I've got lots of random strings of numbers and letters. What makes these actually worth something to someone?
I mean, what makes any money worth anything? Why is a dollar bill worth something? It's no longer backed by gold. Most dollars just exist on a spreadsheet on a computer somewhere at your bank. Money gains use because people start to believe that somebody else will accept it, that you can get this thing, whatever it is, a $20 bill or Bitcoin, and you'll be able to use it again in the future, and that makes it worth something in a sense. And I think there are a lot of qualities that go into successful money, and frankly, I'm not sure that Bitcoin is successful money, but it sort of started along that path. And I think sort of the most important first quality for Bitcoin that perhaps you were referring to is the scarcity of it. Until now, and that was a really hard thing in the digital world, to have scarce digital objects, right? I mean, most digital files, you could just copy and paste them. And so each
As the
one...
music industry learned to its...
Right. And so each one isn't worth very much because it can just be copied and pasted. And what Bitcoin figured out was a way to make a scarce digital object. And it's kind of an abstract idea, but the idea was to create, as the title of my book suggests, a kind of digital gold, a thing that was scarce, and you knew that there would only be so many of them.
Right, and it seems like you made a very conscious choice in naming your book Digital Gold, as opposed to, we've had discussions about cryptocurrency, and obviously it's called Bitcoin. But what are the ways in which it's different as digital gold as opposed to digital currency?
Naming this thing is very difficult, and it's very difficult in large part because it's actually many different things. It's software, it's open source software that runs this thing and releases these new digital tokens into the world. It's probably more like a commodity because it's this scarce thing like gold. But then you quickly go beyond that, and the network makes it sort of more like an email system for money. So we're sort of diving in, but this question of what it is a really difficult one, and part of what makes it interesting.
And now, the perils facing new ideas with Alice Dreger. Justice in science. Why is it missing? What do we need to do to get there?
Well, I think what we're looking at right now is a situation where science is under attack from lots of different points of view. And the argument I make in the book is not that social justice is bad, but rather that we're in a situation where social justice movements really need to be founded in science because you need reality-based social justice. So I try to examine in the book what happens when social justice activists attack scientists, not because they have the facts wrong, but because they have an idea that is politically unpalatable.
And you come up with this idea of the Galilean personality. Right. What is the Galilean personality?
It's somebody like Galileo who is kind of stubborn and self-righteous, but also determined to find out what's really true about the world, and somebody who believes that the truth will save them, even when in fact everything's closing in on them in terms of people being angry and upset and trying to shut them down. And I trace through the book a bunch of different scientists who sort of have this personality and push and push and push, even though they're in a lot of trouble.
And what's also important is that frequently the attacks that you're talking about are not about the data and are not about the data collection. It's a bank shot to try to diminish someone's character and therefore, hope that people ignore the data.
That's very true. And one of the things that happens in the media very frequently is these stories get into the media and there's sort of a standard story to be told. And even though it's not that standard story, it gets fit into that standard story of these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, everybody parts, the right knows which way they're supposed to go, the left knows which way they're supposed to go. And when you start to dig into it, in fact, it's always much more complicated. But a lot of people don't go back to the scientists' own work. What they do is they just read these columns that say this person said this terrible thing, and they believe that that person said that. And the attacks go on and on and on like a telephone game and get away from us, where it's very difficult to bring people back and say, hey, this is what actually happened.
What strikes me also is that in many of these cases, you've got partial truths, and you've got partial victories. And so again, you go back to this fellow Napoleon Chagnon, where he was defamed, I guess, in one very large anthropology association, and his work was challenged. But then there were revisions to that decision, and then there were other organizations that had things to say, and other published works coming out against it. And ultimately, we're left really just needing to dig deeply and weigh a lot of varied things. But it's hard to do that. It's hard to ask a lot of people to do that.
It is hard to do it, and part of the problem is as the economic pressures on journalism continue, that's a role that journalists used to play. They used to really help us figure out, sort out what went where, who said what really happened. And part of what we're seeing now is academics starting to take on more of that role, because that role has been lost to us in terms of journalism. And we do need help trying to figure it out. And I think it's one of the roles historians like myself can play, where historians can take a long view and try to figure out, well, what really happened here, and add some subtlety to the story and try to figure out what really occurred, rather than just having this sort of yelling back and forth that seems to occur largely in the internet age.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable, or listen to the full audio as a podcast, available on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast and the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.